Tô trajadão, tô trajadão, tô trajadão,
I'm excited to start a new series with you. Can you give a hand for our worship team tonight? I'm excited. They did an awesome job. But I'm excited to start a new series with you called All the Feels, where we're talking about emotion. I'll get into that in just a few minutes. But I don't know, how many of you, by show of hands, you guys still use emojis? Do you guys use a lot of emojis? Anybody use a lot of emojis? I know that probably I, as an older, as a 30-year-old, probably use emojis a little bit more than you and probably use them incorrectly. But we all use emojis probably in some way, shape, or form. And here's the reality. Sometimes we will use emojis and we don't even really think about them as we're using them. We're not really thinking too much. It's really just a feeling. We feel something in a moment, and then all of a sudden our thumb goes to what it is that we send in relation to whatever it is that we're feeling. It's easier to throw, or for us to feel an emotion and to throw an emoji like this with like smoke coming out of the nostrils than to express our level of frustration. It's easier for us to send a broken heart rather than to actually really talk about how much something really hurt us. It might be easier to send an emoji where there's the one that has no mouth than for us to really talk about the fact that we don't know what it is that we really should say. And here's the truth, and it's kind of weak illustration, but at the same time it's true, is this. Emojis, although they are these little tiny pictures, they represent very real emotions that we're experiencing in our lives. We are all experiencing real emotions, and sometimes we don't even know how to verbalize those. Sometimes we don't even know how to communicate it to other people. Sometimes we don't even know how to fully even process all that it is that we're feeling on a day-to-day basis. You and I experience a wide variety of real emotions on a day-to-day basis. Is that fair? We experience a lot of emotions. And the question that we kind of want to talk about through this story is, can we control some of these emotions? Can we process some of these emotions in healthy ways rather than letting them get out of control? Here's the reality. Emotions are not bad. They're not bad. It's not bad for you to have emotions. Emotions are not the enemy. Emotions are not something that you should ignore. Emotions are indicators. They help you really realize some very real things that are going on in your life and help you understand some things as you're walking through things. They are indicators, and they're very real, very relevant, and they help you see something's going on inside of me that I'm feeling right now. I'm walking through something. The question is not whether or not you have feelings. We all have feelings, but the deeper question we want to explore in this series is, what do you do with them? What do you do with these feelings as you are experiencing them on a day-to-day, moment-to-moment basis? And so we're going to go through this series, All the Feels, and we're going to look at very real emotions that we all experience on a day-to-day basis. And we're going to talk about how do you not be led by those emotions, but you actually lead them, you actually control them. Because here's the truth. If you don't learn how to handle feelings in a real way right now, eventually they're going to start handling you in the long run. If you don't begin to learn how to healthily walk through the anger that you have, eventually you will be a person who is bitter all of the time, constantly angry at all sorts of situations and all sorts of people. If you don't learn how to handle it now, it becomes hatred. if you don't learn what it looks like to process sadness in a healthy way, it becomes something that seems to take over in your life. And rather than being something that isn't bad, it can become something that's catastrophic if you don't learn how to healthily walk through those emotions. And so that's what we're talking about in this series. A few quick things to kind of get us on the same page. You can write this down. Everyone has emotions and feelings. We all have emotions and feelings. Now, some people feel their emotions a little bit bigger than other people, and that's okay. Some people express them a little bit different and process them a little bit different. It's okay. But some people feel emotions in a very big way. Some people feel them in a little bit more of a, maybe a little bit more of a hidden way, but nonetheless, everybody has emotions and feelings. And so another thing is to understand that each of us experiences emotions and feelings because God did not create us to just think and process information. We are to think and process information, but we also feel. God created us to feel. That's why we experience emotions. It's a natural part of you and I being human. And some emotions will take us to great places, right? Where we're happy or excited and joyful about whatever it is that we're walking through and experiencing. On the other hand, there are some emotions that will lead us to where we're fearful, where we're scared, where we're hurt, sad. Not every emotion is pleasant, but it's part of who you and I are, and it's also part of how God has wired you and I to be on a day-to-day basis. Experiencing emotion is part of what makes you and I who we are. Now, as a teenager, you could probably feel a blend of emotions. And when you were a kid, you think back for a few moments to when you were a little kid. Those were the best days, right? When you were a little kid. You're like, some of y'all are like, no. Some of y'all are like, yeah, no. But think about when you were a little kid. Here's the reality. When you were a little kid, you experienced a number of emotions. Anybody seen Inside Out? Seen Inside Out? You saw the first one, you see the second one? Anybody see both of them? Emotions become more complex. Is that fair? When you're a child, sadness, fear, anger, these things, disgust, whatever it is, whatever emotion is you're experiencing, it's a little bit less complicated. You feel sadness. A child may feel sadness, but where you're sitting as a teenager tonight, sadness might have a little bit of a few other layers to it. It might not just be sadness. What a little child would say is sadness, you might say is embarrassment or humiliation, disappointment or loneliness. There can be layers to what the emotion is, and it's a blend of emotion. You can also experience sadness, anger, joy, all of it somehow simultaneously, all in a few moments while you're sitting at a lunch table at school. We have a wide variety of emotions that you and I experience. And before we jump into the Bible together, I want you to write this down tonight if you're taking notes, and I would encourage you always to pull out a journal and take notes. When we allow our emotions and feelings to linger inside of us, without processing them in a healthy way, they can sometimes become far more difficult than we anticipated. When you let emotions linger there and you set on them and you leave them there, they can become much more difficult than you would have ever anticipated. And if you and I aren't careful, those unchecked emotions can have a negative impact on your emotional well-being and your relationships with people that are around you on a day-to-day basis. So with that in mind, I want to talk about anger. You can write down anger. We're talking about anger tonight. We'll talk about love and lust, I believe, next week. And we'll talk about sadness. We'll talk about, I can't remember what week 4 is off the top of my head, but we'll talk about different emotions. But tonight we're talking about anger. And I want to say this truth to start tonight. You might have even felt like before in your life, isn't it wrong to be angry? Is it wrong to be angry? Is it wrong for me to feel anger? And I want you to write this down tonight. Anger on its own is not wrong. Anger on its own is not wrong. I see some laughing. Is there something funny about me? I don't know. Like one time I ripped my pants while I was preaching, so I just want to make sure there's not a rip in my pants or something. But anger in and of itself is not wrong. Anger is an initial reaction to something that is incredibly hurtful, or something that maybe have been an injustice that you've seen, or maybe somebody treating somebody in a wrong way. And so anger in and of itself is not wrong, but what anger can become can end up being something that is wrong, something that becomes sinful in and of itself. But anger in and of itself is just an indicator there is something that is going on that is wrong here, that is not right. Fair enough? And so we're going to talk about anger. Here's what the challenge is. This is the real challenge. You can write this down. The real challenge with anger is figuring out, what do we do with anger once we feel it? What do we do with our anger? Where do we go with it? What is it that how are we supposed to handle this moment now that we are angry? We've all been angry. We've all been there where we have this moment where we feel like our blood is boiling, like everything is wrong, like we're mad, and we're so frustrated, and we got to do something about it. But what do you and I do when we feel anger? So we're going to look at scripture in the book of Ephesians. Ephesians is a book, it's actually a letter that was written by the Apostle Paul, and the Apostle Paul was writing to a church in Ephesus. And if you don't know this, Paul was a Jewish leader who had this radical encounter with Jesus, and he ended up writing the majority of your New Testament, of your Bible, the second half of your Bible, because of the life change that he experienced in Jesus. And after meeting Jesus, he spent most of his life traveling and investing in people, pouring into the lives of people, telling the known world of that day about Jesus, and planting churches, gatherings of other Christians. I've been so challenged by the Apostle Paul and the way that he lived his life. I got to one of the most recent ones that's really been challenging me is that the Apostle Paul planted a church in a place called Thessalonica. Everybody say Thessalonica. It's kind of a weird word. But in Thessalonica, Paul was ran out after 3 weeks, but there was a church that he still planted there, even though he was only there for 3 weeks. I want to remind you that just because you're a teenager in your school doesn't mean that in 3 weeks you can't make a big difference. God can do incredible things with you. And so the Apostle Paul was investing in different areas and places and people, leaving these churches behind. And in this letter, the Apostle Paul urges specifically to this church in Ephesus to live their lives as God had created them. But in chapter 4, he gets really specific, which we'll see here in just a moment. He's telling them, stop lying, to not steal, to not use just corrupt language or foul language. And then he argued that the Ephesian church should be an example to everyone in that city, arguing that if they would show others what it looked like to truly follow Jesus, more and more people might respond to the gospel. Is that fair? If your life is something that I can look at, and it looks like you follow Jesus, and that appears to be something that I would want to have, I might want to have that. And so in the middle of this argument, starting in verse 26, Paul specifically addresses anger, and I know it's already on the screen. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 26 and 27 says this. Be, what's that word? Be, are y'all asleep? Be angry. And do not sin. So the Apostle Paul doesn't say don't be angry. Is that fair? He says be angry. Be frustrated. It can happen. It'll happen to all of us. But he says do not sin. And then he says do not let the sun go down on your anger, and give no opportunity to the devil. The Apostle Paul didn't say not to be angry. He said, be angry. We've all experienced anger. Show of hands, you experienced anger at any point in your life? Okay, if you're not raising your hand, you're probably lying. We all experience anger in some way, shape, or form. It's human nature. But what the Apostle Paul is talking about is, what do we do after we get angry? What do we do when we experience it? Here's the question that the Apostle Paul is getting at. When you and I get to a moment where our blood is boiling, where it feels like smoke is coming out of the ears, coming out of the nostrils, where it feels like I could just wreck some stuff. Anybody ever seen red when they're getting angry? Okay. You're angry. You're like, ain't nobody really gonna rationally explain anything to me. We experience anger. But the Apostle Paul is saying, when you get to the height of whatever anger looks like for you in that moment, you are at a pivotal point where you need to make a decision, and it's this decision. You can write it down. Are we going to let our anger control us, or are we going to control it? Fair? When we get to that moment where we're angry, where we feel like we're just so frustrated, where we're so angry, what are we going to do next? When we get to that moment, the question that we have to wrestle is, are we going to control our anger in that moment, or are we going to let it control us? When you let your anger control you, it is going to take you to some places that you never wanted to be. It's going to get you to some places that you never wanted to go. Jesus had a few things to say about anger as well in a Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 5. We preached through the book of, or through the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew during our youth week this summer. You can go and watch it on YouTube, and you can also go and watch any of these messages on YouTube as well, because we're starting to put those on there. But Jesus in that sermon touches on all sorts of kinds of topics about the kingdom of heaven and what it's like and what it looks like for you and I to live as people who are following after him. Really, if you were to go to those 3 chapters of Scripture, you would get a very comprehensive look in 3 chapters in one sermon of how you should live your life on a day-to-day basis. And he says this in verses 21 and 22. He has some very interesting things to say about anger. In verse 21, he says, "You have heard it said to those of old, 'You shall not murder, and whoever murders will be liable to judgment.'" Okay. Some of y'all might be thinking, okay, wait, I thought we were talking about anger. Why are we flipping the script and talking about murder now? There's a relation to this. In verse 22, it says this, "But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to counsel. And whoever says, 'You fool,' will be liable to the hell of fire." Now, this passage can be confusing. Is Jesus really saying if you're angry, you're calling somebody a name, that you're going to go to hell? Is that really what he's saying? Well, sort of. If you actually have ever, read through much of what Jesus teaches, you'll see over and over again that he touches places. He has a tendency to touch places in the lives of people that make them very uncomfortable. And certainly this moment, these 2 verses, are one of those times where he's pressing into something that's uncomfortable. And here's what I mean. When Jesus gets up from a pulpit, not that he would get at a pulpit, usually teachers would sit in that day, but when he would get up and he would preach, and he would say in front of them, "You shall not murder," the people are sitting there thinking, okay, I haven't ever done that. I'm good. I must be good because I haven't murdered anybody. But the problem is that not murdering somebody does not make you a good person. It just makes you not a murderer. Fair? Just because I haven't murdered anybody doesn't mean that I'm a good person because I haven't done that. It just means that I'm not a murderer. But when then Jesus flips the script upside down when he says, "But if you are angry with somebody, you're subject to judgment." So now everybody sitting in the crowd who's like, whoa, well, I'm good because I'm not a murderer. Now they're sitting in the crowd like we all have done already saying, well, I've been angry with somebody before. I've been frustrated with somebody before. I've spoke unkindly out of my anger to somebody before. And all of a sudden, they all related with what it was that he was saying. Suddenly, the crowd went from, look at me, I'm good, I'm all right because I haven't done that, to, oh yeah, that's me too. I've been there. I've done that before. And so what Jesus is getting to the heart of is this. Instead of thinking you're good in this area, why don't you actually do the hard work of trying to be intentional about controlling your anger when you feel it because everybody else feels it? We all feel it. Why don't you do the hard work rather than thinking you're good in this moment because, oh, I haven't murdered anybody, so I'm obviously not an angry, hateful, spiteful person. But I didn't like the person down the hall from me because they looked at me weird, and so all of a sudden that bubbled something up in me, and now I'm angry and I want to go punch a locker. Jesus is saying none of us haven't experienced this. We've all experienced anger in some way, shape, or form. So why don't you get intentional? Why don't we all get intentional about controlling our actions when we experience anger? The Greek word that Jesus uses, it kind of also explains this idea of being angry as being enraged, being full of contempt or given over to fury. And when you leave anger unchecked, it becomes hatred. Everybody say hatred. When you leave anger unchecked, it eventually leads to becoming hatred. And so the Apostle Paul is warning us to not let our anger control us. You can throw it up on the screen. Jesus is saying that if we let our anger control us, we might find ourselves doing some things that we cannot undo. Can I get real with you guys for a second? And I've been guilty of this in my adult years, probably more than I'm proud to admit, but I know that there are people when I was your age that in my anger, I said some very awful things to them, and it probably wounded them. You ever heard that old adage, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. I know that in my anger, I've said some things that hurt some people that they may still be walking with today. And some of you may be guilty of some of those same things. I know certainly in my own life that I've let anger get to a place where I've spoke things that I can't unspeak. Anybody ever done that before? Sometimes I think anger doesn't always have to equate to something physical or violent. Sometimes it just equates to you saying some of the most awful things that you would have never said had you not been angry in that moment. Anger can lead you to a place, if you don't get serious about getting healthily processing anger in your life on a moment-to-moment basis, you may find yourself saying or doing some things that you cannot undo and you cannot unsay, and they will leave wounds in the lives of other people. Many of which, if you're a person who walks with in the grace and the mercy of Almighty God, some of which you will hate the fact in your own life that those wounds have wounded people. Jesus is saying, if you're not serious about this anger thing, you'll end up getting to some things that you cannot undo. You and I've got to deal with our anger. So if every one of us in the room experiences anger on a day-to-day basis, maybe not when I say day-to-day basis, just in the in and out flow of our life, we experience anger. And Jesus and the Apostle Paul are both saying we need to be serious about the way that we handle it and what we do. Some of you will get angry before you go to school tomorrow just simply because there's another kid that's present in your school and you have that kind of animosity and bitterness towards them. Anger can be very deeply rooted in people. And if we're talking about the fact that we need to take from these passages that we need to take anger seriously in our lives and we need to deal with it in a healthy way, how do we process anger in a healthier way? Two things. Number one, you can write it down, unchecked anger, it doesn't end well. It doesn't end well. A few things that we can just see from the passage. Unchecked anger, it doesn't end well. Chances are that most days, each of us in some way, shape, or form will experience something that causes us to experience anger. And it's okay for anger to exist there. What did the Apostle Paul say? Be angry and do not. He doesn't say don't experience anger. It happens. And there's initial anger is actually, it makes sense, right? Because it's helping us see that there's something frustrating, there's something that is wrong, and we live in a world where we're going to experience anger because not everybody is like us, not everybody does everything the exact same way as us, say things the same way as us. I mean, we're just going to experience situations where we experience anger. And you could probably, if I told you, list out the things that make you angry and the people that make you angry, it probably would not take you very long to get a list of 10. There are lots of things that make us angry in our lives, but the more challenging question is when you get angry, what do you do next? Because unchecked anger doesn't end well. When you and I get angry, we have a few choices. We have a few things that we can do with it. We can process it in a healthy way. We can talk to somebody that we trust. We can talk to somebody that is in our life. We can make a plan about how am I going to not respond in that way again? Or we can allow anger to grow and to turn into something that we wish it never would have become. And we'll let it control us in a way that we wish we never would have done in the first place. It'll ruin relationships. It'll ruin even the way that you see yourself at times. It'll hurt other people. It'll lead you to say some things that you didn't even know you were thinking. And it'll ruin some things in your life. In short, let me just put it this way, write it down. Anger can cause you to become somebody that you don't want to be. A version of you that you don't want to be in any way, shape, or form. It can cause you to have intolerance. It can cause you to have prejudice towards other people. And it can cause you to just become somebody that you don't even want to be in the first place. Number 2 is anger isn't always wrong, but hatred is wrong. Fair? Anger in and of itself is an indicator on the dashboard, but when you let anger then become hatred towards other people, towards other situations, towards other places, whatever it is, anger itself is a natural emotion. But then when anger grows, even though it isn't always bad, hate is bad. Hate is sinful. The Apostle Paul describes it this way in 1 John chapter 4, verse 20. If anyone says, I love God, but hates his brother, he's a liar. Fair? And for he who does not love his brother whom he has seen cannot love God whom he has not seen. This isn't just about not hating other believers, people who are our spiritual brothers and sisters. Jesus actually covered that when he spoke these words in Matthew chapter 5, verse 43 and 44. He says this, but you've heard it said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Jesus doesn't just say that we shouldn't hate our friends or our family or our brothers or our no, he says that we should actually not hate people, but then we should in turn actually love people. It's not just about not hating people, it's actually about taking a step to love them even when it's hard. Even when there's been something that maybe caused you to be a little bit angry in that situation with that person, whatever it may be, you're called to love them even if they are an enemy in your life. Even if they have done some awful things, said some awful things, and maybe if they've done a ton of things that cause you to be angry, it doesn't mean that you get excused from loving them. You can be angry with what it was that they did, but you don't get an excuse to not love them anyways. So based on what we see John and Jesus say, we need to do whatever we can to not allow hatred for others to take hold in our hearts. We got to be serious about this. Making sure that we respond to our anger in healthy ways, process those emotions in healthy ways. So what are some practical things that we would kind of think about tonight that would help us process anger in a real and relevant way that would not produce something in us that's unholy, something that turns into sin, something that is unsettled, something that becomes hatred, something that kind of steps over the line of anger as an initial emotion and reaction to situations where we're seeing some things that are frustrating and some things that are wrong and some things that are unjust, some things that are sinful. But how do we not let anger turn into something worse? How do we do that? Number one, I'm going to give you 3 things tonight. Number one, identify your triggers. Identify your triggers. Identify what causes you to get angry. When you're walking through your school, when you're going through your day-to-day, when you're in your practice, when you're in your house, when you're with your siblings, whatever, identify the triggers that cause you to be angry. Maybe keep a note in your phone, or maybe it's a notebook or whatever it is, I don't know, but keep a record of, these are the things that cause me to get very angry, to cause me to get extremely frustrated. But then don't just Identify triggers and write them down in your phone or write them down in a notebook. But once you identify them, before you go to bed at the end of each day, look at the things, the running list of those things that frustrated you and caused you to get angry. Submit them to the Lord. Ask God to help you see patterns in your life where you're like, you know what, God? I was sitting at my lunchroom table and I got really frustrated and angry in this situation because of the way that everybody was talking about everybody in our school. Like, identify specific things, and then at the end of the night, process them with God that you might be able to respond in a way that's not angry and hateful, but you would understand the things that are triggering you in those moments. When you can identify the things that trigger you to be more angry than necessary, you know what you might actually realize? Is that you have some situations in your life where you go into the situation angry before anything ever even happened. You might realize that that person that's sitting at the table, you got angry before you even ever sat with them because you actually have something against them. There's something that you haven't forgiven. You might realize that you get angry with your siblings all the time because you're just annoyed at their presence. And really, it's you going into it angry before there's ever even any kind of reason to be angry because you've made up in your mind, you're already frustrated about whatever it is or whoever it is, and God might help you process some things that are going to be pretty painful to you. You're the issue, not them. And you got to submit to that. Number two, let go of grudges. Let go of grudges. You know, when you're looking at a list of the things that make you angry on a day-to-day basis, you're going to see some names and you're going to see some situations over and over and over again. And like I just said a moment ago, you're going to have to ask yourself the question if you're holding a grudge or if there's a lack of forgiveness in your life. If there's something you're still holding against that friend, or there's something that you're still holding against your parents or your siblings or a teacher or whoever it is that you're angry with. The Apostle Paul writes these words in Colossians chapter 3, verse 12 and 13. He says this, "Put on then as God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, compassionate hearts, kindness, humility, meekness, and patience, bearing with one another. And if one has a complaint against another, forgiving each other as the Lord has forgiven you, so you must also," what's that word? Forgive. You've got to extend forgiveness to other people. You know, in your life, if you're a believer in the room tonight, you have a relationship with Jesus, you've been forgiven of the greatest debt that anybody could ever have. And so you and I don't get to operate with the excuse of an unwillingness to move towards forgiveness towards other people. We have to move towards forgiveness. You know, but what do you do when you're angry because you see injustices in the world, you see things that are wrong, things that are sinful, people who are being mistreated, people who are bullied in your school when it's wrong and it shouldn't be that way? Here's the thing I would like to tell you, number 3, in worship, and you guys can come up. Turn your anger into positive action. Turn your anger into positive action. Even if you're angry for the most legitimate reason, it's still not a good idea for you to just bottle anger up. It's still not a good idea for you to just have anger reside there. You can turn anger into a negative reaction, right? We've all probably been a product of turning anger into something negative in a moment, where we said something we didn't want to say, where we did something we didn't want to do, or we maybe just treated a person in a way that we shouldn't have treated them. But in the same way, you can turn anger into a negative action. You can turn it into a positive action. You can get involved. If you get angry about, anybody ever get angry about the way that you see people getting treated in your school? Ever get angry about that? Show of hands, how many of you do something about it? Feel you? It's awesome. That's turning anger into a positive action. It should bother you that there are people in your school who are treated unkindly just because of the fact that they're not as cool as somebody else. Some of you may even sit in the room tonight and you feel like that person in your school. You know, I wish I had all the answers for that, but at the same time, I do want to remind all of us that we can turn anger into positive action. When you see something that's wrong, when you see something that's sinful, when you see something that shouldn't happen, somebody being treated poorly, somebody being spoken about or gossiped about or whatever, you can turn your anger about that thing into positive action. When somebody's being talked about in your school and you see their name just being spoken about so poorly, you can step in and say, that's not how we talk about people, and I'm not going to participate in that. I'm not going to have any part of that. I don't want to be a part of it. You know, anger can motivate us to actually go and do something good. I want to end tonight with just thinking about this visually. Fire is a good thing. Fair? Right? Fire is good. Fire in and of itself can actually be a really good thing. Fire can keep you warm in situations where you need heat. Fire can give you light in dark spaces. Fire can cook food when you need it, right? Fire in the right place, in the right conditions, can actually be a good thing. But fire can actually be very damaging, and it can be very destructive, right? It can be incredibly destructive and incredibly damaging, right? When it's not settled in the right place, in the right conditions, what can be helpful in one situation can be very harmful in another. Anger is like a fire. There can be some very good things that would come from it if it's channeled and it's dealt with healthily in the right environment and used in the right way. Or it can be something that causes things that are catastrophic. And what we're talking about is, are you going to deal with your anger in a healthy way where it doesn't become something that is controlling you, but you control it? You know, the Bible, you can write this down, this is my last thoughts. The Bible doesn't say never to feel anger. Some of you have been taught in church, anger is wrong. I've had a lot of conversations with my son about anger. We don't want it to become to a place, we talk about this verse all the time. Be angry and do not. You can be angry. You can be frustrated. That's okay. But do not sin. Do not let it get to a place where you're sinning. Do not let it get to a place where you're hateful. So the question tonight that we're going to reflect on is, what are you doing with your anger? How are you responding when you're angry? Are you letting God help you with your anger? Are you letting God grow you into somebody who handles moments where you're angry in a healthy, God-honoring way? Or are you letting anger control you in a way that's causing you to go to sinful places, say things that you wish you hadn't said, do things that you wish you hadn't done, and be a person that you don't want to become? So I want you guys to go ahead and stand, and we're going to go into worship. And here's what I want to challenge you with at the altar for tonight, is would you come and lay down some of the places where you're really angry, to the point of hatred, to the point of disgust, to the point of just letting it get to a place where you don't need to be. If you're angry, if you live in perpetual anger about everything, if you know there's some things that you need to surrender as we talk about anger, if you're an angry person and you live in that state, if you're struggling with anger to the point where it is going further than you want it to, and it's grown into something that you feel like anger is controlling you more than you're controlling it, you need God's help, I would ask you to come forward. Right now, you don't have to wait till worship. If you're struggling with anger in your life, come forward to the altar. If you're struggling, you think, I feel like it's controlling me more than I'm controlling it. I feel like I really need God's help in dealing with anger. I just want you to take a few moments as you sit at the altar as we worship for you to submit those things to the Lord. And my guess is that these that are in the front aren't the only ones who have let anger become something more than it needs to become, and that they're not the only ones who probably need God's help with anger. But if we're struggling with anger tonight, we have to submit that to God and say, God, help me not be this way. Help me to not hold this within and help me to submit this to you, Lord, that anger might not control me. But God, with your power, I can control it. And Lord, that anger wouldn't become something in my life where I bottle it up and I isolate, where I keep it hidden within and I let it become something that it shouldn't. But God, help me with anger in my life. So tonight as we worship, that's what we're going to focus on. If you need to come to the altar for anything, come and lay some things down at the feet of Jesus. And leaders, if you see a student, come and pray with them. But let's just make this an altar before the Lord for these few moments as we stand together and sing.